So, have you ever been watching a movie around bedtime and you fall asleep? Say you're watching one of my favorite films, Donnie Darko. You're watching Donnie Darko, you're watching Jake Gyllenhaal's character, Donnie Darko, talk to the terrifying Bunny Frank in the movie theater. You doze off, you fall asleep, you start dreaming about, say, your mother when she was much younger and you were a small child. But strangely, your mother is speaking in the voice of Jake Gyllenhaal, Donnie Darko. You snap awake and you're feeling very disoriented. That is known as a hypnagogic experience. Those experiences that take place between sleep and waking, when we're not sure if what we are experiencing is happening in the real world or the dream world. Predictably, someone like Edgar Allan Poe was very interested in this experience because it was an experience that suggested that the dream world and the real world, the world inside and the world outside, are capable of intermingling, merging with one another, affecting one another. Have you ever gone on a hike alone and you end up on the top of a mountain, a peak? There's nothing there, rocks only. And you're looking out over the vista. And suddenly, a stranger wearing an all blue hiking suit appears to your right. And you look to the person and you have that queasy feeling, oh my gosh, this has happened before. Deja vu. Or have you ever gone to a wax museum? I did. I went to Madame Tussauds in London with my daughter when she was probably around 10 or 11. Have you ever been to a wax museum and stared long enough at a wax figure, say Lady Gaga or Charlie Chaplin, and you felt that the figure suddenly winked or smiled? Of course not. But maybe. Isn't that one reason we like wax museums? Because there's this sense that the inanimate, the wax figure, might suddenly come to life, become animated. This is an experience of the uncanny when something that is not alive appears as if it is alive. Hypnagogia, deja vu, the uncanny. These are weird experiences that probably all of us have had. And when we have had them, we have probably been jolted into a new sense of life. There are things possible in this world that in my rational, habitual day to day, I have become numb to, shut myself off from. So weirdness can become a category for those moments, quirky moments, eccentric moments, peculiarity, freakiness, the far out. We crave these experiences, I think, because they estrange us from our normal habits of thought and perception. They nullify all the old conceptual maps and they propel us into uncharted regions, outlandish, bracing, where what are we going to do? Well, we must create if we are going to thrive. We must create new coordinates that are more capacious, more spacious, more expansive than the ones we already know. So in my book, How to Be Weird, I offer opportunities for having weird experiences that hopefully will expand the imagination. And I'm going to share one with you here, a brief one that will hopefully allow you to expand the way you talk about the world. And this will hopefully expand the way you feel about the world. The name of this exercise is called Write Your Own Lexicon, or we could just say Write Your Own Dictionary. So think of this. Shakespeare invented about 1,700 words. For instance, he liked to turn nouns into verbs and verbs into adjectives. This is called anthemaria, Fancy word, right? Anthem Maria, turning a noun into a verb or a verb into an adjective. He also created portmanteau words where you press two words together, like you might press glare and glaze into, you might press glare and gaze into glaze. Glare and gaze. Press them together, they become glaze. Portmanteau, like a suitcase in which you pack two words into one space, right? He also attached prefixes and suffixes to words to make new words, and he created new words known as neologisms, such as lonely and elbow. Yes, Shakespeare created the word elbow. So there are many reasons for Shakespeare being able to do this. This was a time when language had not become as codified. The English language had not become as codified as it is today. The lexicons, the dictionaries were not as prevalent, and rule books, grammar books, were also not as prevalent. And Shakespeare also, because he wrote in iambic pentameter, needed a certain number of syllables and a certain number of accents for each line, so he would often have to make up words that would fit the rhythm and the meter. But historical context aside, Shakespeare did what all great writers do. What is that? They make up words for feelings not yet named. They make up words for feelings not yet named. Now, this can be a political act. Think about it. The rules of language, grammar, strangely, support cultural hierarchies. Those in power dictate what one can say or can't. We can easily see how this might apply to say how English was taught in schools in mid-20th century America, where the idea of like English with a big E was something that required grammatical correctness. And if you could not speak with grammatical correctness, then you were seen as lesser. Now, of course, the case was that the people brought up to speak with grammatical correctness tended to be white people, middle and upper class white people. So if you grew up in a culture that perhaps came from another country and where grammatical correctness was not necessarily a part of your life, you could be seen as sort of a second-class citizen. So to challenge semantics, how words are defined, to challenge grammar can be a liberatory act. So think about Toni Morrison in her novel Beloved. She creates a word called rememory, which is a portmanteau word. It's a word that combines remember and memory. And what does this word describe? A former slave's way of telling her stories. The main character in the novel, Sethe, recovers parts of her traumatic past that official histories, white histories, were trying to erase. And so she is able to weave her traumas into powerful narrative. But Morrison needed to create a word for this special kind of memory and this special kind of storytelling. So rememory, a neologism that Morrison invokes to push against the standard rules of language. Now, to create a new word for a feeling need not necessarily have an overt political impetus behind it. You can just create a new word out of the desire to understand yourself better. So here's the exercise I would propose. Write out the definition of a feeling there's no name for. Write out the definition of a feeling there's no name for. What does that mean? Here's an example. This is my example of a feeling there's no name for. The act of wisping your fingers over the crevice of your arm. The act of wisping your fingers over the crevice of your arm, where your arm is opposite the elbow until you get goosebumps. So, right here. Wisp your fingers here. You get that little tickly feeling until you get goosebumps. So the act of wisping your fingers on the part of your arm opposite your elbow until you get goosebumps. What would you come up with to name that? Or think about the helpless feeling you get just after you've accidentally, but possibly on purpose, said something to your spouse that you know will cause a terrible fight. Maybe that's one of those moments of passive aggressive behavior where you're at dinner and you just blurt something out without really thinking about it too much. But the minute you've said it, you go, ooh, that's probably going to start a fight. Shouldn't have said that, but there's a part of you possibly that might have intended to say that. I suspect we've all been there, not necessarily with a spouse. It could be with a romantic partner, even a close friend or a parent. Now, create a word for these feelings. So I might say to wisp your fingers on the part of the arm opposite the elbow would be aureliate. Aureliate. That's my word for my feeling. Maybe the second situation I've described, accidentally, but maybe not, saying something you know is going to cause a fight with your loved one, repunder. Why do this? After you invent your word and its meaning, you'll be able to explain yourself to yourself and to others with more precision. And your peculiarity will come out, not to mention the impish pleasure of breaking the rules of Webster's dictionary. But ultimately, it's just a fun game that gets your imagination going, that is playful. And life is often boring, so why not consider passing the time doing that? You could create your own dictionary. Each day, set a little time aside. You could do this little exercise. And after a month or so, you might have a lot of these entries. And you will create your own dictionary, your own language. And what could be more stimulating than reading back over the feelings you have named that have not been named and the words you've created that have not yet been created?